I need to be hospitalized for a while. So could you take care of Rhonda while I undergo my surgery? I know it might be hard to visit every day, but it'll only be for about 10 days at most. Could you please do this for me? That's not possible. I already have plans. Plans, shopping, and hanging out with friends, stuff like that. Can't you work something out? I know I'm asking a lot, but I really need your help. No way. Rhonda is just a stranger to me. Canceling my plans and going out of my way to take care of a stranger. Not happening. I understand it was sudden and unreasonable of me to make such a request, so being refused was fair. However, I couldn't accept the reason or the attitude behind it. In hindsight, I feel relieved I didn't entrust Rhonda to her. I thought Fred, my brother-in-law, should step in and say something, but it seems he spoils her because he's afraid of upsetting his wife, even though Fred is family. It doesn't feel right to meddle too much in someone else's household. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if leaving things as they were was really okay. Apparently, it wasn't. Rhonda secretly had $4 million saved up. So we're splitting it, right? That's $1 million each, isn't it? This is seriously amazing. When everyone gathered, Samantha was the only one whose excitement was noticeably over the top. Her enthusiasm was so unrestrained that it was hard to believe she was attending a memorial service. But I suppose her reaction was understandable. It had been revealed that Rhonda had left behind $4 million. Samantha was likely envisioning all the ways she could spend her share, her dreams expanding with every thought. But those dreams wouldn't come true. In fact, she was in for a major disappointment. My name is Danielle. I'm 48 years old and work part-time. My husband, Patrick, is an average office worker. We have a daughter who recently graduated from college, started a job, and moved out. Now, it's just me, my husband, and my mother-in-law, Rhonda, living together. Hearing about living with a mother-in-law might make you think of constant conflicts, but in our case, there's none of that, and Rhonda and I have a great relationship. Rhonda, shall we go grocery shopping? I'd just slow you down if I came along. We're only walking to the local supermarket, and I don't think of you that way at all. Let's take the scenic route through the park today, as usual. Going grocery shopping together, often as part of a leisurely walk, has become a daily routine for us. I walk slowly to match Rhonda's pace, making sure she doesn't trip or get into any accidents. We often meet neighbors on the way to the supermarket. For us, the so-called mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict is non-existent. My husband also has a brother, Fred, with whom we get along well. I believe there was no potential for problems in our lives. However, things started to shift slightly after Fred got married 3 years ago. The catalyst for this may have been the passing of my father-in-law 4 years ago. My in-laws had originally lived together as a couple. Due to their age, my husband and I, along with the still single Fred, had suggested that they move in with us. However, my in-laws stubbornly refused, likely thinking it would be an inconvenience to us, and continued to live on their own. In hindsight, we probably should have tried harder to convince them. They seemed financially comfortable and were able to rely on welfare services and private options like housework assistance, so their lifestyle appeared manageable. As a result, my husband, Fred, and I compromised by visiting them regularly to check in. But with my father-in-law gone, it was no longer a situation where compromises would suffice. We proposed again that Rhonda move in with us. Rhonda, living alone, has to be too much now. I don't think so. No, it is. That's right. Everyone is worried about you, Rhonda. Do you think living with us would be a burden? None of us feel that way. In fact, We're more worried about you being on your own. I see. Is that so? Initially, Rhonda seemed intent on declining. She thought she could manage on her own because of the money my father-in-law had left behind. Since my husband had also inherited a portion of that money, we had a rough idea of how much Rhonda had at her disposal. Indeed, it was a substantial amount, enough that she wouldn't face financial difficulties. My in-laws had once been large landowners in the area, owning much of the surrounding land. However, during the post-war agricultural reforms, those lands were converted into agricultural bonds. The value of those bonds plummeted due to the rapid post-war development of infrastructure, leaving them nearly worthless. Even so, the amount had been significant for its time. Still, there are aspects of life in old age that money alone can't address. After persistently convincing her, Rhonda finally agreed to move in with us. Once Rhonda was on board, the next question was whether she would live with us or with Fred. The decision was reached quickly. Fred has work and can't take care of Mom alone. We'll live together with you, Mom. That's true, but are you okay with it? Danielle. Me, I don't mind at all. I think our daughter will be fine with it too. I see. In that case, I'll leave Mom to you, Patrick. I'll stop by to check on her occasionally. Let me know if you need help with anything. At that time, Fred was still single, so it was naturally decided that we would live with Rhonda since supporting her on his own would be difficult for him. We moved into my in-laws' house, and our life as a family of 4, my husband, daughter, Rhonda, and I began. Fred would also visit occasionally to check on Rhonda. Things went well up to that point, but about a year after Rhonda moved in, the situation began to change. Fred is getting married. Congratulations. I thought you'd live alone forever. This is such relief. Was it that surprising that I'm getting married? Surprising doesn't even begin to cover it. Fred suddenly announced he was getting married. They started dating a month after meeting and got married within 3 months, a whirlwind romance. Since Fred was already in his 50s, things likely moved quickly. We'd never heard Fred talk about romance before, so the whole family was shocked. But that wasn't the only surprising part. This is Samantha, the woman I'm marrying. Nice to meet you. Later, Fred brought his fiancée to our house to formally introduce her to Rhonda. We'd heard about her beforehand, but seeing her in person stunned us even more. She looked so young that if Fred had introduced her as his daughter, we might have believed him. At 30 years old, she was over 20 years younger than him. On top of the age difference, her flashy appearance felt a bit unusual for someone coming to make a formal introduction. When I greeted them at the door, I couldn't help but wonder if everything was going to be okay. However, my worries quickly dissipated. Rhonda, it looks like we're out of coffee. I'll go get a new batch. Patrick's tea is gone too. Let me help. You're a guest, Samantha. Please, just have a seat. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Samantha was polite and cheerful, and she blended in with us immediately. Fred, seeing this, wore a proud expression the entire time. Soon after, Fred and Samantha got married and started their life together. Even after their marriage, Fred continued to visit to check on Rhonda, and Samantha would occasionally join him. Rhonda, how about going on a walk with me today? You'll join me on my walk. Thank you so much. Danielle, take your time with your shopping. Thank you, Samantha. My relationship with Samantha was also amicable. We were thrilled to have gained another beloved family member. 3 years passed. Our daughter graduated from university, got a job, and moved out. It was now just my husband, Rhonda, and me living together. Around this time, an unsettling air began to creep into our lives. Fred still visited regularly to check on Rhonda. Over the last 3 years, though, Samantha's visits had become less frequent, and now she only showed up around Christmas time. Of course, no one was obligated to visit, so it's entirely Samantha's choice whether she came or not. However, her change in behavior didn't go unnoticed, and we couldn't help but feel concerned. "Samantha hasn't been visiting at all lately," I remarked. "I keep inviting her, but she always says she has plans." Fred replied, "Plans? What kind of plans?" "Samantha quit her job after getting married." "Right. Yay, it's usually shopping or hanging out with friends. Can you even call that plans? Whether she visits us or not is one thing, but is she at least managing things at home properly?" "Well, let's just say she does the bare minimum. I know it's not really my place to say this, but maybe you should pay more attention to how she spends her money and time." "I've thought about it, but it feels awkward to bring up. Is that really okay?" "Well, to be honest, she's been like this since before we got married. I figure it's normal for a husband to help out with household chores. Don't worry about it." Although we were trying to give sincere advice, Fred always dismissed it with an awkward laugh. It was obvious he doted on his much younger wife. He also seemed scared of upsetting her, and had taken to spoiling her. Considering that he finally got married at 50, I could somewhat understand his perspective. Besides, even though Fred is family, meddling too much in someone else's household is never a good idea. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't sustainable. When January came, that feeling only grew stronger. Why do people always feel the need to gather at their parents' house in January? There are so many fun things going on, sales, events, everything. Isn't it ridiculous to just stay cooped up at home during such an exciting time? "Hey, Danielle, why don't we ditch this and go shopping instead?" Samantha said with a laugh. "What are you talking about? Here, take this dish. There's quite a bit to carry, so get my husband and Fred to help," I replied, handing her a tray. "Danielle, you're so serious. You'd enjoy life more if you loosened up a bit, you know." I laughed off Samantha's comment as a joke, but deep down, I was thinking, what on earth is she saying? Over the past 3 years, my trust in Samantha had dwindled significantly. She seemed to want to distance herself from our family as well. I started to think it might be better to keep our relationship at arm's length for now, rather than trying to force closeness. But maintaining that distance led to an unexpected issue. Ouch. "Hey, are you okay?" I might not be. At some point, I started feeling pain around my upper abdomen. The pain grew steadily worse until it was unbearable. After seeing a doctor, I got the diagnosis: I have gallstones and need to have surgery to remove them. "Are you serious? Are you going to be okay?" "The surgery isn't complicated, and they said I'll recover fully." Fortunately, the condition was treatable with surgery, and it wouldn't have a significant impact on my daily life afterward. But my mind was occupied with a different concern. I might have to be hospitalized for about a week to 10 days. If I'm in a hospital, Rhonda will be alone during the day while you're at work, and that worries me. "Yay, you're right. Knowing Rhonda, she'll probably insist she's fine for 10 days, but with her mobility issues, I'd still be worried. Everyone else has work, so Samantha is the only person we can rely on, isn't she?" "That's true. I'll ask Fred to see if Samantha can stop by during the day while you're in the hospital." "Do you think she'll agree?" "Given the circumstances, I think she will." "All right. In that case, I'll call Samantha myself and explain the situation. It's my health issue, so it's better coming from me." "Got it. I'll let Fred know what's going on." The following day, I called Samantha. As my husband had said, there was no way she would turn me down under these circumstances. When you're in trouble, you help each other. I would help Samantha if she needed it. That was the right thing to do, I told myself. Hello, Samantha. Yes, what's up? Is this about your hospitalization? And Rhonda. So Fred already told you? Yes, that's right. I need to have surgery and will be in the hospital for a bit. So I was wondering if you could check on Rhonda while I'm away. I know it's a big ask to come by every day, but it's only for about 10 days at most. That's not going to work. I already have plans. Shopping and meeting friends, stuff like that. Could you maybe reconsider? I know I'm asking a lot, but it's important. No way. I mean, she's just my husband's mom, basically a stranger. Why should I cancel my plans and go out of my way to do something so inconvenient for someone who's not even family to me? I see. Well, if that's how it is, then I understand. Sorry for asking. No problem. Good luck with the surgery. While I understood that it was a sudden and inconvenient request, her reasoning and attitude were hard to accept. I started to feel uneasy about relying on Samantha for anything involving Rhonda and decided to drop the matter. In the end, my husband arranged for a temporary home care helper to assist Rhonda during the week I'd be in the hospital. Leaving Rhonda's care in his hands, I underwent the surgery. The operation went smoothly, and I was able to return home in a week. As soon as I returned home from the hospital, Fred came over. Danielle, Mom, I'm really sorry about everything that happened this time. It's fine. Honestly, I could have managed on my own, but you went out of your way to arrange a helper for us. And you even covered the cost, didn't you? Thank you. I don't have any complaints either since Rhonda was okay with the arrangement. But putting this incident aside, I think you really need to have a proper talk with Samantha. Yeah, I guess you're right. I'll try talking to her. Fred's tone was weak and unconvincing. It sounded like he might bring it up, but only in the vaguest terms. Though I didn't voice it, I wished he'd be firmer about this. In any case, my hospitalization ended without issue, and our daily lives returned to normal. For a while, I thought we could finally relax, but that peace didn't last long. A few months later, Rhonda fell seriously ill. While her life was spared, she was hospitalized indefinitely. Visiting her at the hospital became part of my daily routine. Rhonda, are you feeling okay? My back hurts a little. Could you help me move? I gently adjusted her frail body, which now felt lighter than before. She couldn't even get out of bed on her own anymore. A few days later, on my way to Rhonda's hospital room, as usual, I ran into Fred in the hallway. Oh, Fred, you're here. Yeah, I came with Samantha earlier, but Rhonda was asleep, and while I was waiting, I had to use the restroom. Samantha's still in the room. Samantha came too. Well, with Rhonda being in this condition, I had to drag her along. Together, we headed toward Rhonda's room. From outside, we could hear Samantha's voice. Could Mom be awake? Samantha doesn't get much time to talk to Rhonda, so why don't we wait a little? Fred and I stood by the door, listening to Samantha speak from inside. From then on, I continued visiting Rhonda daily. Then, a year after she was hospitalized, Rhonda passed away. My husband, Fred, our daughter, and I wept before her. The funeral was a small, private affair attended only by close family. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, but its simplicity only deepened the sadness we felt. After the service concluded and we prepared to head to the crematorium, my husband and I chatted briefly with some relatives outside the venue. As they walked away, Fred approached us, his expression a mixture of sorrow and confusion that was difficult to describe. Are you all right? Is something bothering you? No, it's nothing. It's just, having the funeral makes it sink in that Rhonda's really gone. Yay, it's tough, but we're all so busy now. Once things settle down after the funeral, it'll probably hit even harder. Don't say things like that, I said, half joking. You're making me anxious. We tried to comfort each other by talking, sharing our grief, confusion, and sadness. Samantha, as expected, was nowhere to be seen among us. Looking around, I finally spotted her near the altar. For a moment, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was mourning Rhonda in her own way. But that thought was quickly dismissed. Rhonda had $4 million hidden away. Samantha exclaimed loudly, her voice betraying her excitement. So we're splitting it evenly, right? That's $1 million each. Oh my gosh, this is insane. Her mood was jarringly upbeat, completely at odds with the solemn atmosphere of the funeral. It was clear she wasn't here for the ceremony. Her true interest lay elsewhere. To be fair, it wasn't entirely surprising. The revelation that Rhonda had amassed $4 million in assets was shocking to all of us. Samantha's head was likely spinning with daydreams of how to spend her imagined windfall. But that dream would not come true. In fact, it turned out even worse than she expected. Samantha, oblivious to the somber mood, continued to chatter enthusiastically, ignoring everyone's expressions. Hey, how did Rhonda end up with more money than father-in-law? Isn't it usually the man who has the bigger fortune? Could it be that Rhonda was secretly some kind of femme fatale who transferred father-in-law's assets into her name? That's absurd, Fred interjected, sounding both annoyed and exasperated. I told you before, didn't I? Our family were major landowners before the war. That legacy came from Rhonda's side, not Dad's. Dad was the one who married into Mom's family. Right, they were only rich before the war. Right, after the land reforms, did not they lose most of their wealth? You're thinking of the Land Reform Act. The farmland they owned was bought out cheaply, and the value of agricultural bonds plummeted during post-war inflation. So how did she end up with $4 million? Apparently, they sold the land for about $100,000. It wasn't much considering the size of the property, but at the time, $100,000 was a fortune. And Rhonda invested that money. Invested in stocks or something. No, she invested in gold. Gold. You mean gold. Yay. Back then, gold was just over $1 per gram. $1 per gram. Gold's over $100 per gram now. Exactly. Add in the money Dad left, Rhonda's savings, and the value of this house, and it all comes to $4 million. Samantha was impressed to learn that Rhonda had $4 million. However, Samantha's interest wasn't in how Rhonda had accumulated that amount of money, but in getting her hands on it and how she could spend it. Her expression shifted quickly from interest to a big smile. So the $4 million is getting split evenly, right? I'm already planning how I'll spend my million. You're not even in line to inherit anything, Fred said bluntly. Of course I know that, Samantha replied dismissively. Technically, the inheritance goes to you and Patrick, doesn't it? But since your money is our money, that means it's basically mine too. What the? That's just your selfish logic. Actually, the money isn't just being split between me and Patrick. Rhonda left a will. A will. So there are others inheriting. Yeah, the will states it should be divided 3 ways between me, Patrick, and Danielle. Danielle. Samantha's voice rose in disbelief. Why? Danielle has no right to inherit anything, just like me. It was a gesture of gratitude for the care Danielle gave her. That's ridiculous. You need to contest this. Without that, your share drops from half to a third. Do you even realize how much less that is? Speak up, Fred. I'm fine with it. Fred said calmly. What? Why? Someone else is taking your money, you know. Danielle isn't someone else. She was good to Rhonda. Besides, this is what Rhonda wanted. I'm not going to fight it. You're hopeless. Samantha spat, turning to Patrick. What about you? Your mother's money will end up in the hands of someone else's wife. That's Rhonda's money, and it'll be spent however she likes. Aren't you angry? Patrick leaned back, his arms crossed. Do you plan to waste Rhonda's money, Samantha? Spend it recklessly? Of course not. I'd put it in our joint account, obviously. I don't understand why you two are so indifferent about money. Samantha scoffed. It makes no sense. To be honest, I chimed in. I can't understand why you're so fixated on money and material things. Aren't there more important things in life? Nothing's more important than money. With money, you can do almost anything. Samantha smiled smugly. Anyway, at least a third of it will go to Fred. As his wife, I'll manage it. So don't even think about touching it. Samantha acted as though she were doing us a favor, expecting us to be grateful. Just a moment ago, she had said that the inheritance would be split into 4 equal parts, and she was planning to take $1 million for herself. But now, she was aiming to take the entire sum that would go to Fred, an extra $300,000. This wasn't exactly a compromise, was it? Her greed was showing, and it was this very behavior that led to Fred eventually losing his patience. Manage it as his wife. That won't be necessary, Fred said firmly. What? Don't get cocky, Fred. Remember, I married someone 20 years older than me. You've been lucky to have me. Do you really want a divorce? Think carefully before ignoring me. So, if I refuse to listen to you, we're getting divorced? Fred asked. That's right. You wouldn't want to lose a wife 20 years younger, would you? Good, Fred said without hesitation. Because I've been wanting a divorce too. I won't listen to you anymore. That settles it then. What? Samantha's confidence faltered. Fred has known all along that you only married him for money, I said, watching her pale. He couldn't bring himself to divorce you before, but now he's had enough. Known all along. What are you talking about? Do you remember when Rhonda was in the hospital? After she collapsed. You came with Fred a few days later. When we arrived at the hospital, Rhonda was asleep, and we had to wait until she woke up. Do you remember when Fred went to the bathroom? I met him in the hallway, and we walked back to the room together. But then I heard your voice coming from inside. You're being persistent, then I thought. You also said, hurry up and just leave the money. And let's not forget, die already and leave me the money. You knew how much I'd inherited from my father, and that my mother had a lot of money too, didn't you? You must have expected that. But the $4 million was beyond what you imagined, wasn't it? You were pretending at first to get married, weren't you? But when Rhonda stayed healthy longer than you thought, you couldn't keep up the act, and you started getting frustrated. You even insulted her while she was sleeping, didn't you? That's a misunderstanding. Samantha stammered. You misheard. I was saying, get well soon. That's a lie, I replied flatly. How can you say that so confidently? Samantha demanded. Because Rhonda told me herself, I said. She was awake at the time. She pretended to be asleep, because she feared you might harm her if you realized she was listening. That old woman. Pretending to be asleep. Even at the funeral, in front of the altar, I continued. You apparently said, finally, she's gone. How do you know that? I heard it. Patrick and Danielle were talking to relatives when I was near the altar. I overheard you, who didn't notice me, throwing insults at my mom. Your behavior toward Rhonda. Your attitude about the money and marriage. If anyone had found out, you should have been asked for a divorce right then and there. But it seems Fred had a hard time making up his mind. However, after seeing how you no longer even bothered to hide your true self in front of us, Fred reached his limit. That's right, I can't take it anymore. So I'm getting a divorce. Wait, I don't want a divorce, Samantha cried. Really? I asked, surprised. But didn't you just say that if Fred didn't listen to you, you'd get a divorce? And didn't I say, I won't listen? Yep, I heard him say that too. We'll be witnesses to this, I added. Please, no. Samantha's voice wavered, realizing her words were turning against her. All right, Fred said, standing up. Now let's talk among the family. You can leave. Samantha glanced at us, and when she realized there was no point in arguing, she slowly stood up. Her steps were shaky as she left the house without another word. Soon after, my brother-in-law and his wife, Samantha, divorced. Of course, Rhonda's inheritance wasn't part of the settlement. They had been married for less than 5 years, so the assets were minimal, and Samantha reportedly walked away with only a few $1,000s. Even that small amount, though, was better than nothing. Still, it was hardly enough for someone used to depending on others. Samantha had no personal savings, and had even quit her job when she married Fred, relying on his income. The 5-year gap in her work history was a huge setback, but given her youth, she'd probably find work again. I just hoped she would stop depending on other people's money and learn to stand on her own. Fred apologized to us after the divorce. I'm really sorry. I wish I had made a decision sooner. If I had, we wouldn't have had to deal with all the unpleasantness, and neither Rhonda or the two of you would have had to suffer. He seemed to regret not divorcing Samantha earlier. If he had, we wouldn't have felt awkward about the inheritance, and he wouldn't have had to overhear the cruel things Samantha said in the hospital. I wasn't bothered by it, though. Neither was my husband, but I couldn't help but wonder what Rhonda might have thought about all of this. We would never know. As I was lost in thought, my husband stood up and walked toward the back of the house, returning moments later with a letter in his hand. This letter. Mom asked me to hold on to it. A letter from Mom? Fred asked, surprised. Yeah. She asked me to give it to you if you ever divorced. I didn't know she had written such a letter. What does it say? I don't know. She never told me, my husband replied. He handed the letter to Fred, who opened it with a look of uncertainty. The letter was a shock to Fred. It mentioned how Rhonda had been deeply disappointed by Samantha's actions, especially the way she spent money from her father-in-law and the cruel words she had spoken in the hospital. But Rhonda also expressed her happiness about the kindness that my husband, Fred, and I had shown, as well as how she appreciated Fred's regular visits to check on her. In the end, Rhonda wrote that the love and support from family far outweighed the negativity, and that Fred shouldn't worry about her. When Fred finished reading, he carefully folded the letter and bowed his head in front of the family altar.
You can't live without a man. You're a useless wife who can't do anything on your own. Don't get too comfortable. My name is Isabel. I'm a 29-year-old homemaker. I live in a multi-generational home with my husband Mark's family. Originally, Mark's grandparents lived on the first floor and his grandmother on the second. But after she passed away and his grandfather moved to a nursing home, the second floor became vacant. My mother-in-law decided to renovate it for Mark without asking us. I had already retired and we planned to rent an apartment and live there while I worked part-time. But mother-in-law strongly opposed this, begging Mark, "Please don't leave an old woman behind," while crying. She calls herself old, but she's only in her mid-50s. And my father-in-law is still working. Yet, She cried like she was the tragic heroine of a story. Mark, who had always been bothered by his mother's meddling, initially refused to live with her. But considering his work commute and our future savings, we agreed to live there on the condition that she wouldn't interfere in our marriage. Sharing an entrance was a bit awkward, but we thought it wouldn't be a big deal since the bathroom, toilet, and kitchen were separate. We decided to make the best of it. But it turned out to be a sham. Mother-in-law came over every day. From morning till night. Doing nothing but being there. And always making snide comments. Mark has a sister who lives 30 minutes away by car and claims to be a career woman. She also came over every weekend, acting arrogantly towards me and complaining with mother-in-law. Each time, I told myself, I'm in customer service, and mother-in-law and Tiana are difficult customers. I had to keep reminding myself, or else I'd go crazy. Eventually, Mark reached his limit and scolded mother-in-law and Tiana. Mother-in-law went silent, sniffled, and retreated to her room. And Tiana blamed only me, saying it was pitiful for her mother. Father-in-law came to check on us, but Mark said, Just leave it, Dad. You handle Mom. Mother-in-law always acted like this. Every time Mark scolded her, she would dramatically sulk and lock herself in her room. She was waiting for Mark to say something kind. But Mark never did. This farce happened quite often. I'm sorry, maybe this decision was a mistake after all. Mark's support made it easier for me to endure the situation. In the neighborhood, there's a middle school student named Jake who's related to Mark's family. He and Mark have been close for years, and recently, Mark has been tutoring him at home on weekends. Despite being scolded by Mark, mother-in-law and Tiana still tried to snoop on their study sessions. But Jake would bluntly say, You're interrupting. During a study break, Tiana started bragging and then said, Maybe I should start dating without being so picky. Jake flatly responded, That's impossible because you have a bad personality. Unfazed by Tiana's irritation, he continued to put her in her place. I'm leaving. I feel sick. I have a class to attend. Tiana stormed out, shouting, It's a Spanish class, as she stomped down the stairs. Gradually, Tiana started avoiding Jake and stopped coming over. He had successfully repelled her. Later, Jake told me, Those people used to harass my mom. They even picked on my girlfriend recently. I like Mark, but I can't stand them. I felt oddly satisfied and thanked him. Life was comfortable for a while since Mark had blocked mother-in-law and Tiana stopped visiting. But then tragedy struck. Mark received orders for a 3-month solo assignment far away. I was devastated but had no choice but to accept the company's decision. It can't be helped if it's a company order. I suppressed my gloom and saw Mark off with a smile. The next day, I was jolted awake by the sound of someone rushing up the stairs. Mother-in-law was standing in my bedroom, looking very self-assured. Isabel! How long are you going to laze around? What? I checked the clock, it was only 3 a.m. Isabel, don't think you can slack off just because Mark is away. Starting today, I'll be giving you a thorough education. What are you talking about? Annoyed at being woken up, I resisted, and a heated argument ensued. Come downstairs and start with our housework. Mother-in-law left, but I had no intention of complying with her unreasonable demands. As dawn broke, mother-in-law returned, this time with Tiana. You think you can defy us? You've been too comfortable because Mark was here. But now it's just you, Isabel. And that bratty kid won't be coming either. You married into this family, so you have no choice but to obey us. I was about to ignore Tiana's smirking face and her early morning harassment, when mother-in-law's next words suddenly changed my mind. "You're a stupid woman who can't live without a man. If you don't like it, that's fine. I'll spread the word that you're a useless wife who can't do anything on her own." Those words fueled my competitive spirit. "Fine, let's see if I can go 3 months without a single complaint from you." From then on, I woke up at 3 a.m. to spite mother-in-law and took care of the chores in her part of the house. While I was stuck doing all the cleaning, laundry, meal prep, and cleanup, mother-in-law did nothing but complain about each task. "The vacuum is too loud. The kitchen noise keeps me awake," she'd say, even though she was the one who woke me up at 3 a.m. and then slept until almost noon. "I can't sleep because of the noise from your bedroom," she'd add, reminding me of the creepy complaints she'd made when we first moved in. Though I'd started doing this out of spite, the constant work from early morning to late night was harder than I'd thought. I couldn't afford to think waking up at 3 a.m. was tough. I had friends who were sleep-deprived from newborns or woke up at 5 a.m. to make lunch for their kids before going to a part-time job. If you think I'm the only one having a hard time, you're wrong. I was still naive. If I woke up early, I could go to bed early. There was nothing I couldn't do. But mother-in-law wouldn't let me. In the afternoon, just as I was about to rest before grocery shopping, she'd barge in saying, "I'm into aerobics now," and start some bizarre routine with the DVD player at full volume. At night, she'd find fault with the cleanliness of our living space, refusing to let me rest even after midnight. The more I tried, the more mother-in-law escalated her harassment. Tiana started coming over every night for dinner, criticizing my cooking while eating everything. Seeing Tiana's already voluptuous figure expand while I was losing weight from lack of sleep was almost enough to break me. "Do you think Mark found a girlfriend over there? That would be interesting. I hope he finds someone younger and more charming next time. I want to hold a cute grandchild." I agree. Any child from this current wife wouldn't be cute. Listening to them joyfully badmouth me, I lost the energy to argue. I wanted to tell Mark, but he was also working hard. If he had to listen to constant complaints between his wife and mother, he might get fed up and actually start cheating. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Mark. That's why I never spoke up about anything. One day, a parade of contractors started showing up at my mother-in-law's house. They brought in new appliances like rice cookers, washing machines, and microwaves, as well as furniture like dining tables and beds. "It's all getting pretty old, so I decided to replace everything," my mother-in-law announced, flashing an envelope in front of me. My eyes widened. That was the money I had carefully tucked away in my bedroom drawer. "How dare you secretly save money from my son's earnings? And those tacky undergarments, how disgraceful." I couldn't believe my ears. "Did you go through my bedroom?" Unashamed, she replied. "Don't make it sound so bad. I was just helping Isabel with the cleaning," laughing as she spoke. I was trembling with a mix of disgust and anger. That money wasn't secretly saved, it was a fund, Mark. And I had been building together for emergencies. I couldn't forgive her, not just for invading my privacy, but for stealing from me. "Mother-in-law, this is a crime," she scoffed. "Crime? Within family? Don't be dramatic. We're letting you live here. Think of it as a gift for your parents." Just then, I saw my father-in-law, who usually turns a blind eye to her snide remarks, trying to sneak away. Our eyes met, and he mumbled something under his breath as he left. My mother-in-law looked at me triumphantly. "Oh, by the way, next week is our wedding anniversary. We've invited some relatives, about 15 people. It'll be fun." Isabel, make sure you entertain them well so I don't get embarrassed. I was so frustrated that I ran upstairs and cried where no one could hear me. Am I really as useless as my mother-in-law and Tiana say, unable to do anything on my own? I blamed myself for a moment, but after crying for a while, I found my own stubbornness ridiculous. Why am I crying over what these people say? That's when I decided to take refuge at my parents' house until Mark returned. When I told Mark, he scolded me for keeping silent for so long. He also apologized to me repeatedly. When I told him I planned to move out the next day, Mark made a suggestion, and I immediately decided to act on it. The next morning, I started by apologizing to my mother-in-law. While my mother-in-law gloated and made snide remarks, I calmly went about my chores. When she took her afternoon nap, I contacted the relatives we'd invited. I then gifted my in-laws a 3-day, 2-night trip voucher, saying it was from Mark. Mark will be back for the celebration. You can relax until the day, and we'll have everything ready for a grand celebration when you return. My mother-in-law was thrilled, flipping through the travel brochure. Tiana, realizing she'd be alone with me, decided not to visit during that time. This allowed me to prepare in peace. Once my in-laws left for their trip, the movers arrived and efficiently cleared out their belongings. Around that time, Jake and Katie happened to pass by the house. We exchanged nods, and Katie and I shared a knowing smile. After all the work was done, I booked a room in a business hotel and called Mark, who said he was on his way. I couldn't wait for him to get back. That evening, both our phones started buzzing with calls from my mother-in-law. After ignoring several, I finally took a deep breath and answered. What is the meaning of this? Explain yourself. Ignoring her shrill voice, I calmly said, We'll be right there. And hung up. Mark and I nodded to each other, held hands, and headed to my in-laws' house. As soon as she saw me, my mother-in-law lunged at me, but Mark held her back as we entered. The living room was barren, not even a table or TV, and all the relatives were already there. What is this? You're making me look bad. What have you done on such an important day? Nobody was upstairs. Mark, this woman did something terrible while we were gone. Leave her now. My mother-in-law and Tiana were screaming, ignoring the relatives, while my father-in-law just stood there silently. This was a decision made by both Isabel and me. We're not coming back here, Mark declared. My mother-in-law lunged at me again. Isabel, you've corrupted my son. You thief, taking our stuff. Mark restrained her, but as she tried to lunge at me again, I calmly said, Thief? Who's the real thief here? That was money Mark and I had saved. You rummaged through our home and used that stolen money. If you have anything to say, we can file a police report for theft and you can explain yourself there. Then Ellie muttered, Wow, stealing money? That's low. Mother-in-law quickly turned toward the voice and blurted out, No, you got it all wrong. My daughter-in-law gave that to me. She's just trying to set me up. Exactly. Who harasses their mother-in-law on such an important celebration? It's obvious who's lying here. But no one reacted, and an awkward silence filled the room. Isabel! Apologize right now. You've ruined an important celebration. Apologize deeply in front of everyone. As mother-in-law grabbed my head and tried to force me to kneel, Katie spoke up. I think there's a misunderstanding. We're not here to celebrate an anniversary. Mother-in-law froze at those words. What? What are you talking about? As Tiana glared at Katie, Tilda, who was standing nearby, said with a smile, "We're actually here to celebrate Mark and his wife moving out, or rather, escaping. Why would we celebrate an anniversary for someone who gathered us all here just to harass Isabel?" "How dare you say that, Isabel? What have you told these people?" Mother-in-law glared at me, her eyes filled with rage. Katie then said, "Do you think we're oblivious? The whole neighborhood sees Isabel working hard from early morning. And you and Tiana have been, let's say, quite helpful to me as well. It's easy to imagine what you've done to Isabel. Everyone here has had their own experiences with you and Tiana." The other relatives nodded in agreement. "What? Don't talk about me and my mom as if we're terrible people," Tiana shouted. Jake retorted, "Not as if. You are terrible people. Haven't you noticed you're pretty disliked? What kind of language is that? You little brat. I never even called for Jake." Tiana shrieked and lunged at Jake, but several people held her back. "Mark, you can't be serious about leaving too. Just let the wife leave. Don't be fooled by her. You're a kind and considerate person. She must have brainwashed you. Please, come back." In the midst of the chaos between Tiana and Jake, mother-in-law clung to Mark. But Mark firmly pulled away from mother-in-law and said, "I'll say it again. Don't ever come back here," while looking her straight in the eyes. Mother-in-law then exclaimed, "How cruel! How cruel!" and ran into the bedroom, covering her face with both hands. As the door slammed shut, we heard mother-in-law scream, "The bed! The bed is gone!" I told mother-in-law, who wasn't shedding a tear, "That's because they reclaimed what you bought with stolen money." I couldn't help but be amazed as I said it. To mother-in-law, who was standing there with her mouth agape, I said, "This is my anniversary gift to you." I handed mother-in-law the anniversary gift and said, "Please open it." Mother-in-law tore open the gift and yelled, "What is this?" "It's a boomerang. You know, what goes around comes around. Bad words and deeds always come back to you. Always." I smiled at mother-in-law as I said this. Mother-in-law threw the boomerang on the floor and started screeching. Father-in-law didn't say a word throughout this whole ordeal. After that, we moved to Mark's new job location. Mark had requested a transfer, and it was approved. In our new home, we placed the appliances we had reclaimed from mother-in-law's house, but we immediately got rid of the bed because it felt creepy and bought a new one. Mark and Jake occasionally keep in touch, and I've also started to occasionally talk on the phone with Katie. Katie told me what happened to mother-in-law's family afterward. Tiana was secretly dating someone she met on a dating app and was thrilled to get married, but the guy turned her down the moment they met because she looked nothing like her photos. I wonder how much she edited those pictures. Tiana, who had quit her job in anticipation of getting married, couldn't pay her rent and now lives on the second floor where we used to live. And Jake, who was apparently very upset about being teased, started doing aerobics at home for weight loss. The noise is so loud that it's causing daily fights with mother-in-law, and the whole neighborhood can hear them. Mother-in-law continued to ignore her anger, but one day, a crack appeared in the floor from Jake's constant jumping, leading to the biggest fight they've ever had. But that incident led Tiana to give up on her diet, and now she's just lounging around the house doing nothing. Surprisingly, it turns out that father-in-law, who always avoided conflicts as if they had nothing to do with him, had racked up debts. To escape from the hysterical and selfish mother-in-law and Tiana, he'd been frequenting bars and lavishing gifts on young women. When mother-in-law and Tiana found out, They berated him so much that father-in-law couldn't take it anymore and left a divorce application before walking out. That's the one thing that makes me feel some sympathy for mother-in-law, considering father-in-law's utter lack of responsibility. Mother-in-law, feeling abandoned by both her son and husband, sought help from relatives, but knowing her temperament, none of them offered any assistance. Mother-in-law and Tiana, who've treated father-in-law like an ATM for years, are now without income. I wonder how they plan to survive. Well, given their mentality of expecting everything to be handed to them, they'll probably find a way to get by. One day, while Mark and I were having coffee in our new room, he said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? You could have gone back to your parents' house instead of enduring all this." I replied, "Because it was frustrating to be told that I couldn't do anything without a man. I was relying on you and Jake and not doing anything myself." After thinking for a moment, Mark muttered, "The ones who can't live without relying on a man are those two, not you." During those tough days, I realized my homemaking skills had improved, so I started working as a housekeeper. It's surprisingly enjoyable. Of course, there are hard times, but I find true satisfaction in making people happy with what I can do. I even started getting requests for my services. Mark is supportive of my energetic work life. I've also started studying to become a certified nursing assistant through online courses, thinking about our future. Mark and I join forces. I don't want to rely solely on Mark. I want us to support each other. To protect this happiness, I'll keep moving forward, stronger than ever.